I now come to one of the active learning strategies I had mentioned in the earlier slides, called 1-minute paper reflections, or simply 1-minute reflections. This activity is ideal to use when you want your students to reflect on and think about what they have learned in a particular class. In this activity, too much load is not put on the teacher. Neither is it very time consuming for the students or the teacher. This is a simple, brief activity, albeit an effective one. So in this, all that the teacher has to do is that she has to or he has to provide students with one question in the last 5 minutes of class. That one question is not anything that is specifically from the curriculum, but is more about the students learning in that class. As you pose the question, emphasize to the students that their responses should be brief and concise. Some of the questions that you can ask are, actually any one of these would suffice. You could ask the students, what was the most important thing that you learned in the class today? What questions remain unanswered in your mind today? Summarize the main point of today's lecture in one sentence. One thing I wish, that means the student wishes, had been discussed during today's class. We could also ask the students, how do you think you will use what we learned today in your everyday life? So here you are nudging the student to focus on the application of whatever you taught in your classroom. Any one of these questions in the last 5 minutes of class will encourage students to reflect on what they learned. After giving them some moments for just collating their answers, ask a few students, maybe 3 to 4, to share their answers. And then once that is done, you can summarize and respond to any important points that came through the students' sharing. One of the good things about this activity is that this kind of activity can even be used in the middle of the class if you feel that energy levels are waning. It sort of energizes everyone up, brings everyone up back on their toes. Let's do one thing. Let us pause and write down everything that you can remember from what has been covered in the session so far. So let me give you a minute to do so. Once you write, then I will continue. Please begin. Anything that you remember? Anything that stands out? Although I cannot see you, I do hope that you are writing. All right, I hope that you were able to remember 2 or 3 things at least from what we have covered so far. What I did briefly right now, and you can take a few more moments on it when you are in your actual classroom, is just this activity of pausing. In the middle of a lecture, at some opportune moment, you can pause. And you can do the same thing that I just did with you. Pause in the middle of a lecture and have students write everything that they can remember from the preceding class segment. And if students want, at this time, if they are writing, they can also ask you questions, encourage questions. This kind of activity actually encourages students to take stock of what they have learned, retrieve it from memory, and like the 1-minute reflection, also make sure that everyone is on their toes. It generates concentration. So pausing and writing is also something you can try in your classrooms. Again, it does not require too much extra effort on our part and does not take extra time out of our teaching period. One of the things that I would like to mention about active learning is that it enhances metacognition in our students. Metacognition is awareness and understanding of our own thought processes, of our own learning processes. When we ask students questions about what they are learning, how they are learning, we are enhancing their metacognition. The advantage of active learning strategies for us is that for us as teachers, what students write during a pause or during their 1 minute reflections is an excellent way for us to assess students' understanding and whether they are really comprehending what we are trying to say. Active learning also encourages an emphasis on students' explorations of their own attitudes and values. Some of the questions you ask can be about students' own opinions and views on a given topic. It helps students develop insight into their own thinking and their own stance on issues. So, for example, when I ask students about their opinion of the Heinz dilemma, there is something they understand about their own moral development. Just if you were curious about whether Heinz's action is right or wrong, in the action of stealing to save his wife's life, really, for such dilemmas, is there a correct answer? Kohlberg actually believed that yes, one particular answer stands above the others in its ethicality. And that was that Heinz, yes, did the right thing by stealing. After all, a life must be saved. But then Heinz should have been ready not just to steal for his wife, but to steal for anyone who was in that situation, because all human lives matter more than any profit making for a pharmacist. So that was Kohlberg's answer in terms of what would be the most ethical response for Heinz to engage in. Steal, but then steal for anyone who is sick and dying from a serious illness. Let us now move further. Some more advantages of active learning. Because students are thinking for themselves, when we use active learning strategies, naturally their knowledge of a topic increases. Braxton, Millam, and Sullivan also found a positive link between active learning on one hand and institutional commitment on the other hand. So institutes where students were experiencing active learning were more committed to their institutes. And they also had a stronger intent to return to the institute in the next semester. So somewhere where we use active learning strategies in our classrooms, it enables our students to bond to the institution in general. The third advantage of active learning is that it fosters students' autonomy. It gives them a sense of freedom in their own learning, a sense of involvement and control in their own learning. Also, fourthly, it has been seen that active learning approaches are an effective tool in helping students who come from certain social and economic disadvantages. I would now like to present some research-based evidence on the effectiveness of active learning strategies. You see, the point of insisting or encouraging any kind of pedagogical practice only makes sense if we have research that proves its efficacy. And there is research evidence to show that as opposed to passive learning, active learning enhances our students' learning experience. I will share 3 such pieces of research evidence with you. The first is by Hack et al. They examine the effects of active learning for students in the University of Washington. The university has a program called EOP, Equal Opportunities Program. And within that program was a class of biology students where this particular research was carried out. The unique thing about the EOP program is that it caters to educationally and economically disadvantaged students, who are usually the first in their family to attend college. Also within the EOP program are many underrepresented minority students. Traditionally, students in the EOP had a mean failure rate of 22% compared to students in other programs who had a failure rate of 10%. When active learning strategies were introduced in the EOP program, it was seen that students who were otherwise disadvantaged economically and educationally showed a huge benefit in their learning. And the achievement gap between the EOP students and the non-EOP students reduced by 50%. So we know that this is one group of students that benefits from active learning strategy. As the second research evidence, I would like to present the work of Lorenzo et al., who investigated the impact of active learning approaches on male and female performance in physics classes. Physics is generally a subject which boys take because there is this stereotype that boys are better in physics. It was seen that the inclusion of active engagement strategies in this particular physics class benefited all students. All students learned better through active learning strategies. But the greatest impact was on female student performance. The rise in female student performance was particularly noteworthy after the introduction of these strategies. In fact, in classes where there was a high dose of active learning approaches, the gender gap between the boys and the girls' performance of physics was eliminated, with girls performing as well as boys in this particular paper. The third piece of research evidence is a meta-analysis of 225 studies by Freeman et al. Freeman et al. Compared failure rates and exam performance in constructivist versus exposition-centered courses. Constructivist courses are those where active learning strategies are used. And here, exposition-centered courses were those where more traditional methods of teaching and learning were used. The meta-analysis of 225 studies indicated that students in traditional lectures were 1.5 times more likely to fail than students in classrooms where a constructivist approach was taken. Moreover, student performance on exams and other assessments increased when some active learning strategies were included in the course design. So there are two advantages of active learning strategies which are clear, that they reduce failure rates and they increase performance on exams, apart from the well-known benefit of generating interest in class. Also, the benefits offered by active learning strategies were consistent across disciplines, which included natural sciences as well as social sciences. So students of biology, chemistry, computer science, engineering, geology, maths, physics, and psychology showed lower failure and higher performance on exams when active learning strategies were used. And here comes the logic for actually trying out these strategies in our own classroom.